Okay, let's begin. Last week and this morning you were discussing the end of 2 Kings. And we learned that the northern kingdom had been carried away and dispersed throughout the nation of Assyria. And Judah was sent into exile into Babylon. The books of Kings were written to answer the question, how did we get here? Yes, poor us, right? But the answer was given in the retelling of Israel's history from the beginning, from them being under a monarchy of kings, King Saul, David, and Solomon, to them being led by two separate kingdoms under the rule of 39 kings, separated between the north and the south. And most of these kings did evil in the sight of the Lord because they turned the people away from God and led them to worshiping idols. The people had forsaken their first love, Yahweh, and worshiped pagan gods instead of him. God had not failed his people. His people had failed to keep the promise covenant that they had made with God. But in spite of their failures, God promised that those who turn back to him with their whole heart and soul would be returned from exile. So we're going to look at Deuteronomy 30:1 through 4. Now it shall come to pass, when all these things come to you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among the nations where the Lord your God drives you, and you return to the Lord your God, and obey his voice, according to all that I command you today, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, that the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where the Lord your God has scattered you. This was in Deuteronomy, ladies. This was, when we began. So they were being warned way back then. If you don't obey me, this is what's going to happen. But even when it happens, I'll still bring you back. Amazing God. So now we come to the book of Chronicles. As you're reading Chronicles, you're going to say, maybe, wow, I've already read all this. It's just a repeat of everything I've heard already. But actually, it's not. It does overlap in time with 2 Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, sorry. But 55% of Chronicles is new material. It's something different that you haven't read before. So that's just like the Gospels, the 4 Gospels of Jesus' life. Some of the information about Jesus is the same in several of the Gospels, and some of the information is different. So it just depended upon the author's perspective. So it's not a contradiction. It's just something new being added. So look forward to discovering the new things rather than focusing on, I've already read that. Okay? So just as the books of Samuel and Kings were originally one book, so too were the Chronicles. In fact, 1st Chronicles opens with genealogies, and 2nd Chronicles ends with a proclamation from the king of Persia that permitted God's people to return to Jerusalem to build God's house there. And in between the beginning and the end of Chronicles is the retelling of all the reigns of the kings of Judah, just Judah. The temple is the unifying theme between 1st and 2nd Chronicles. The temple represents God's presence and is the spiritual link between their past and the future for the returnees from exile. The temple had been completely destroyed by Babylon. And as a result, fear arose among the returnees that God would never be present with them again. Today, we are blessed because God's presence is found when within a body of believers. So in 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? So believers never have to worry. Is God going to be with us? Is he going to return? He never left us. He's within us. We just have to lean on him as he's within us, as we encounter our challenges, because life is not going to be easy. The title Chronicles means events or happenings of the day, and sometimes the author is referred to as the chronicler. Jewish tradition says that the author is Ezra. Ezra, and he was a priest as well as a prophet, and he was an important figure in the return of the exiles to Jerusalem. He also wrote the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that we'll be studying later. The author has retold the stories of Judah's past to provide a message of hope for their future, the promised Messianic King. Accordingly, in hopes to bring about a spiritual revival, the author leaves out the sins of David and others and focuses on their lives from a priestly perspective, their relationship with and devotion to Yahweh. The books were written approximately 430 BC, after the return from exile. And the audience, whereas the books of Kings were written to the audience who were still in exile in Babylon, the books of Chronicles are written to those who are coming back. Even though it's a repeat of their history, it's written to them. It's focusing on them who've come back to build the house. They had lost their identity and connections as family, as relatives during that time away. They longed for the glory days of David, but most of all, they longed for the presence of Yahweh. Would he ever return to them? The genre of the Chronicles is a historical narrative, and it's one of the 12 books of history. A fun fact is that Chronicles encompasses the widest span of time than any other book, because it starts with the creation of Adam to the end of David's life in 1 Chronicles, and from Solomon's reign to their exile into Babylon in 2 Chronicles. So what are some of the purposes of the books of Chronicles? Well, mainly it's to show God's faithfulness and goodness throughout their history. So even though they were unfaithful to him, he reminded them how much he loved them and longed for their relationship to come back to him. To show God's control of history, just as he controls history today in our circumstances. He controlled history to accomplish his will to dwell among them in a perfect and holy relationship. God first shared this vision with Moses in Exodus 25:8. And we can read that with me out on the line. It's, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So in Exodus, he's telling the people, I want to dwell among you. Okay? And another purpose was to show God's choice to build his eternal house, the Son of David, the promised Messiah, Jesus Christ. And we learned that in 2 Samuel 7:16. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. And of course, he's speaking to the Davidic line of which the Messiah comes Another purpose is to show the importance of the Levitical priesthood in approaching God, because according to the laws given to Moses, the Levitical priesthood represents a foretelling of the sacrifice Jesus made on the cross for us to bring his people into the glorious presence of God. And let's look at Hebrews 2:17. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. So because these books overlap in time frame and they repeat some of the same messages about the same people, it's good to contrast them. We got a taste of this last week, but here's the chart that reminds you of the differences between them. In the King's version, history is viewed from the throne. In the Chronicles version, history is viewed from the altar. In the King's, it's written from the perspective of prophetic judgment. In Chronicles, it's written from the perspective of priestly hope. In Kings, the political history is given with the palace at the center. In Chronicles, the religious history is given with the altar at the center. In Kings, wars were prominent. In Chronicles, the temple is prominent. Kings is dark, reality in tone, whereas Chronicles is hopeful in tone. Kings is a record of the northern and southern nations, while Chronicles only refers to the southern nation of Judah. Kings is a continuing history of nations. Chronicles is a continuing history of David's line. Kings reflect man's failure, and Chronicles reflect God's faithfulness. So as you can see, 1 Chronicles overlaps 2 Samuel, and 2 Chronicles overlaps 1 and 2 Kings in time frame. Now we come to the chapters that we're going to be looking at for this week's study, which is chapters 1 through 10. Again, they were written from the priestly perspective to the returning remnant who are going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem following their Babylonian captivity for 70 years. As we heard last week, a thread of remnant runs through the remainder of the Bible and was also present in previous chapters of the Bible. Our covenant God will always preserve a remnant of his chosen people, even when they are under judgment. Those returning from exile represent the remnant during this time period. Other examples from the past where remnants were survivors include Noah and his family when there was the big flood. God preserved Noah and his family from the judgment that he had made on mankind for their evilness. Another example comes from the 7,000 faithful followers of Yahweh who were revealed to Elijah when he was fearful in running away from Jezebel, who was killing all the prophets. God reminded him, I have 7,000 followers that are faithful to me. You're not alone. So keep looking for that remnant that God continually preserves as you're reading from now until the end of Revelation. You'll notice that the stories of the northern kingdom are missing because they had turned away from God and worshipped other idols. And their disbursement in Assyria was effectively eliminated their tribes. The stories of David are also presented in a positive light, with no mention of the sins against Bathsheba or Uriah. David portrays the future messianic king. So again, it's a message of hope. So here we come to chapters 1 through 9. Get ready because they are all genealogies. Most of the names will be unfamiliar to you. But remember, the audience, these names would be familiar to the people returning from Babylon. So, to help you, instead of getting frustrated by reading all these lists of names, as you recognize a name, because there will be names that you'll recognize, as you recognize the name, try to recall that person's position in the past. What was that person's relationship to Israel, and to how did it reveal more about God or Jesus? And that will just give you some peace. Oh, I did learn something. I remember that. Yay. So why all these genealogies? My goodness, 9 whole chapters. Then they are boring, no doubt. But they provided the audience, the returning Judeans, that a fresh vision of who they were. They were a chosen people of God, whose lineage traced back not just to Abraham, but to Adam. And since all people came from Adam, they were special because God chose them above everyone else. It reassured them that the God who restored them was the same God of their fathers. The genealogies reflected continuity with their past, their rightful claim to specific land portions, and their entitlement to their tribal identity. And the genealogies reassured the returning Jews that they had family, tribal identity, and were God's chosen people. Where do we find our identity today? In spite of what kind of family we came from, our identity is in Christ. We are sisters in Christ. We are daughters of the King. We are heirs to the throne. And if you haven't committed your life to Jesus, please make this the day that you want to know more about Jesus, that you want to know more about what it means to belong to Him. Ask your table leader or any of the leaders that are here today if that refers to you. It's not too late, so don't wait. The main characters in chapters 1 through 9 are the Messianic King, which is through David's line, and that's found in chapter 3. And the priesthood through Aaron's line is found in chapter 6. So both of those chapters I would focus on mostly because they're the main characters, but definitely at least read through the list of genealogies. Both Mary and Joseph's lineage came through David's line, the line of Judah. The Levite priests led worship, oversaw the sacrifices, took care of the temple, and were essential to point the people back to God as a remnant those returning to Jerusalem. Remember, the high priest also foreshadowed Jesus, so they're very important. Genealogies end with the last Adam, who is Jesus Christ. Adam, the firstborn of humanity, by his sin ushered in sin and death, and is considered the first Adam. Jesus, the firstborn and only Son of God, by his sacrifice on the cross, conquered sin and death, and is called the last Adam. Jesus, the last Adam, represents God's plan for redemption of mankind back to himself, through the line of David, through the line of Judah. Chapter 10 is a retelling of Saul's death and is in stark contrast then to David, which will be the remaining chapters in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles. So in conclusion, genealogies remind us that we are all go back to Adam. We all belong to the same race, born equally, in that we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Salvation today is for all mankind by God's grace alone and not by any of our own good works. So there are basically only two families, The family of Adam, into which all of us were born with a sinful nature. And the family of God, into which all of us can choose to become a part of, have an opportunity to belong by God's grace alone. This is the family of the last Adam. This is the family of life. So in John 10:10 it says, Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Thankfully, believers belong to the family of God. So as you're doing these chapters 1 through 10, please pray that God will reveal to you a truth he has for you in this. And again, through chapters 3 and 6, pick 3 familiar names. So all of you might have different ones, and that's fine. Pick 3 familiar names from each chapter. And remember what role they played in Israel's history and how they revealed God or Jesus more clearly. Look for Jesus and the 3 R's in your reading. And may your table be blessed as you pray together today. Thank you very much.